Hello Vision Nation! In this episode, we're going to cover the story of how Paul DeJoria went from being homeless to becoming a billionaire. Paul, or JP, grew up poor and faced tons of struggles before making it big. He had to deal with people slamming doors in his face when he sold encyclopedias. He also dealt with tragic losses, and he only started his company at age 36. Despite all those setbacks, he still became a huge success. It's a story with some real juice for your listening pleasure. Last thing I want to mention, I changed the dollar figures in this story to today's dollars. Alright, let's dive right in. Welcome to Wall Street Vision. This show is on true stories about people making millions. I'm Vlad Dolgochev. This show is for informational purposes only and is not investment advice. Full disclaimer in the show notes. So JP was born in the 40s in a poor neighborhood in East LA. By the time he was only 2 years old, his father had abandoned the family. It seems strange, but back then some dads would go, "Honey, I've got to pick up some turnips, I'll be right back." And they'd go out the front door and move to another city and set up a whole new life there. It was a weird time. Mom was left to raise JP and his brother all on her own. This was emotionally painful for the kids. It was hard to understand and reconcile what kind of father would leave the family like that. Mom worked 7 days a week and they didn't have a lot of money. Now, today some people say they don't have any money, and you see them with the latest iPhone and spending $80 a week on Starbucks. When I say that JP's family didn't have any money, I'm talking about being so broke that some days mom would have to walk over an hour to get to work because she couldn't afford any bus fare. That's a real struggle. Eventually, the financial issues got so bad that JP and his brother were placed in a foster home. The deal with the foster home was that they'd look after the kids during the week, and the mom could see them on the weekends. This put a strain on the family, but they were a resilient bunch. They were poor, but they were happy. There was lots of love in that family. The constant stress around money motivated JP to think like an entrepreneur. It got him excited to make money on his own so he could help the family. When he was 7 years old, JP and his brother went to a store and they bought some wood boards. They built these wooden plant holders, the kind of thing that people would put on a patio or their front porch. The two of them went around to restaurants in their neighborhood trying to sell this product. Who could say no to two little entrepreneurs, right? Well, there was a waitress working in one of the restaurants, and she bought one of those things for $5. Hachi machi! It was a huge win and a big boost of confidence for the two brothers. Since then, JP kept up one job or another. Anything from selling Christmas cards door to door to waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to deliver newspapers. This early entrepreneurial mindset taught him sales skills and a serious work ethic. You learn a lot from doing any type of job. And when you start selling and working at 7 years old, that knowledge compounds. This gave him a lot of experience that came in handy later in life. This other interesting thing happened around that time. It was close to Christmas and the family was downtown looking at Santa and all the twinkling Christmas lights. There was a man from the Salvation Army standing there ringing a bell. He had a big bucket with loose change in it. Mom told JP and his brother to take $1 and put it in the man's bucket. Back then, $1 could buy you a bunch of candy, so it was a lot of money for a kid. JP and his brother tossed the money into the Salvation Army bucket, and they looked up at Mom and asked her, "Why did we do that?" It seemed strange to give money away at a time when the family didn't have any. His mom said, "That's the Salvation Army, dear. They help people. No matter how little we have, there's someone out there who has even less." JP never forgot that. It was one of those key moments that was burned into his memory. When he was 9 years old, his mom was finally financially stable enough to get JP and his brother back. They were all so happy to have the family reunited. There's a lot of knockoff effects of growing up in a poor family in a bad neighborhood, and one of them is that you don't get access to the best teachers. Here's an example. In high school, JP was sitting in a class and he was passing a note to his friend. The note said something totally innocent like, "Meet you at Denny's after school." Well, the teacher caught them and went into a fit. He asked them to stand up and called them out in front of the whole class. He yelled, "Take a good look at these two because they'll never amount to anything." Imagine how embarrassing that was, being put on the spot like that by an adult when you're just a teenager. That's the kind of BS you've got to deal with while you're struggling in a lower income family in a podunk neighborhood nobody cares about. But that's a whole nother bag of hammers. Now after high school, JP didn't have the grades to go to college, so he spent 2 years in the Navy. He got out at around 20 years old and got married and had a kid pretty quickly. But listen to this, the girl he married wasn't a true life partner. They weren't really that compatible. JP fell in love with her for her looks. Mistake as old as time, am I right? Well, JP had to get to work, so he got this job selling encyclopedias, knocking door to door, catching people at home while they're eating frozen TV dinners on their couches. It took him days of knocking on doors to get the first person to actually speak with him. Then it took a full week to get his first sale. Now, I've dabbled in some door-to-door sales years ago, and it's brutal. His job was 100% commission-based, so he only made any money when he made a sale. He did that job for 3.5 years. Now, you know the average career length of someone in that business? Just 3 days. Salespeople who tried it got so fed up that they quit in less than a week. And I understand why. Imagine interrupting somebody's dinner trying to peddle them some encyclopedias. You've got to have thick skin for that. That tells you something about JP's attitude. To be able to persist with that job for over 3 years means he's got an incredible will to win and he's okay with hearing hundreds of rejections. You know a huge reason why so many people don't get what they want in life? It's because they're afraid to look silly or they're afraid to try something and fail at it. We've all been there. But take a lesson from JP. None of that stopped him from knocking on the next door after he just had one slammed in his face. That type of attitude played a huge role in the massive success that he created for himself later in life. So on top of this terrible job, his personal life was very rocky. One day he was coming home and his wife was walking down the stairs. She asked for the keys to the car to get some groceries. JP didn't think anything of it. He walked through the door and saw his son next to a handwritten note. The note said that she couldn't handle being a mom anymore and that their child would be better off with JP. Say what now? How could you just walk out on her husband and child? Here's my thing. If she wanted to end the relationship with someone she's not into, that's fine. But leave her 2-year-old kid? That ain't right. It was heartbreaking for JP. He cried that whole night. What JP didn't know was that she planned this for a long time. So for months she didn't pay any of the bills, and instead she kept the money all to herself. Within 48 hours of her leaving, their power was shut off, and JP got evicted with his 2-year-old son. That woman even cleared out all their savings and took the car, so JP didn't even have a car to sleep in. Now looking back, JP could have and should have moved back in with his mom, but he was just too proud to go back to his childhood bedroom. Instead, he stayed with a friend. And the friend was in one of those hardcore biker clubs. So JP stayed at this guy's house, and some of the biker wives helped watch his kid. They were living in this really seedy part of LA then. It was a hard neighborhood. It was the kind of place you avoid at all costs, and you definitely didn't want to be there after dark. In life, when it rains, it pours. So apart from being evicted with his son, another tough moment happened to JP in those years. His brother was very important. They were raised together without a dad, so they really had to rely on each other for support. Their relationship was so close. Well, one day the brother was riding his motorcycle on one of those winding roads that has lots of turns. He took a corner going a little too fast. The bike skid from underneath him and he hit the pavement, and tragically he died at only 29 years old. JP was really heartbroken by that. It was a huge loss. Whenever JP needed anything, his brother was always there. They were incredibly close. This was a very hard experience to go through. On the work front, JP met a recruiter and got a job selling haircare products. With his great sales background, he became a star in the company really quickly. In a year and a half, he became their national manager. He was doing an amazing sales job, but he just didn't mesh well with his colleagues on a personal level, so he got fired. Then he went through a series of these sales jobs where he'd crush all his quotas, and even though he'd make money for the company, things just wouldn't work out. He'd either quit or get fired. I think some people are entrepreneurs because they're stubborn and they want things done their way. That can create conflict when they're working for somebody else. So JP was 36 years old and he was struggling and wanted to find his niche. At that age, most people have already set up the foundation for their careers. Back then, that's the age most people had the white picket fence house and 2.2 children. And here was JP struggling and getting fired from jobs and having a rough go with his relationships as well. That's when he met Paul Mitchell. Now, Mitchell was a hairdresser who did funky cuts and unique styles that were way out there. He was artistic. He was a hairdresser's hairdresser. At one point, he was even considered one of the top hairdressers in the world. He was a true professional in his craft, and he had all the swagger to back it up. Mitchell created his own shampoo and conditioner formula and sold them in his salon. Every week, those products would sell out completely. When JP found out about this, he immediately realized the potential. Since he did hair product sales before, he already had experience in the industry. Imagine what a huge advantage it is to have a product that people want so much that it sells out. That's way easier to market than selling encyclopedias nobody wants. Their products were unique in a few ways. The shampoo only required one wash when most other shampoos in the market required 2 washes. This saved hairdressers time and money. And the conditioner they had could be left in the customer's hair. Other conditioners had to sit for 10 minutes before getting washed off. So together, those products helped hairdressers see more clients each day, which meant that the hairdressers made more money. Plus, hairdressers loved the product because it allowed them to do hair sculpting, which really opened up the types of hairstyles they could do. JP and Mitchell were excited by the prospect of building a business together. Mitchell only had $1,300 in his bank account. And JP didn't even have that. JP had to ask his mom if he could borrow $1,300 to match the investment, and that's how they became 50-50 partners. It was high stakes to put his mom's money into the business, but that gave JP that extra kick of motivation. They were a solid team. Paul was the pro hairdresser, and JP would do all the sales. The plan was for JP to also get $2 million in funding from an outside investor to help them scale the business quickly. JP found the investor. The day for closing their deal was coming up. At the same time, JP had some marital issues with his second wife. They weren't getting along and things got so heated that JP agreed to give her the car and the house. He was counting on the $2 million coming in from the investor. The closing day for the deal came and JP went in to finalize everything. And then he got a phone call that caught him totally off guard. The investor had changed his mind. It was the 11th hour and the investor was trying to get out of the deal. You see, back then unemployment was really high. Inflation was 13% and interest rates were 20%. And there were these massive lineups to get gas because of huge supply issues. It was a very uncertain time to invest. Putting in $2 million on two unproven guys for a luxury product that people didn't have to buy sounded very risky, so the investor pulled out. Textbook oaf move. Can you imagine the stress that JP was going through? He just gave his soon-to-be ex-wife all his assets and now the deal fell through. He didn't have anywhere to go, so he went back to sleeping in his sloppy jalopy beater car, and he'd also collect glass bottles in empty parking lots and bring them to a grocery store to get a few cents per bottle. He'd collect enough of them to get a few cheap meals during breakfast and happy hour. It was that good old chunky Jif on Wonder Bread nutrition plan. Reminds me of my college days. This local park had outdoor showers, and that's where JP bathed. That way he could keep up a bit of a ruse and still look professional while he was getting his company off the ground. It was a rough start. Now, in terms of the company, they put in a big order for hair products. They didn't have the money to set up their own factory, so they outsourced all the manufacturing. And by the time they got a delivery of their first 10,000 bottles, they had 2 weeks to sell them before payment was due. Their packaging was black and white because that's all they could afford. Color packaging cost extra. And looking back, that was a good move because it made their product look chic and classy. It also stood out because most of the other products came in colored packaging. And an added bonus is that it appealed to both men and women. So JP went down and started selling their shampoos and conditioners door to door to beauty salons. He promised salons that no matter how big they got, they would never sell to retailers. He said the general public could only go buy his product in the salon. This meant that salons would keep making money if they sold this product to their customers. He was making great progress, but it's hard to sell 10,000 units of anything in a few weeks. The bill came due and he didn't have the money. So when vendors called him up, he would do the old, "Oh, I'm out of town now, so sorry, I'll be back soon and I'll pay you then." And then he'd rush to go back on knocking on doors trying to sell as many bottles as he could. It was do or die, so he figured that he'd sort through the ethics later. One of their sales strategies was for Mitchell to offer free presentations on different types of hairstyles. This was a great way for them to provide value and to get their product in the door. It took a full 2 years of hard work for them to be able to pay their bills on time. Up until that point, it was a constant stress of being on the verge of bankruptcy and just squeaking by to keep operating as a business. JP had many sleepless nights during those 2 years. Now, when you think of the 80s, one of the things that comes to mind is big hair. The big pop stars and big bands of the day all had it, and everyone listening to them wanted that same look. The products that John Paul Mitchell Systems developed were perfect to get that type of style. In the mid to late 80s, things really took off for the company. Their hair products were selling like hotcakes. JP and his partner made it big. Their unique model of selling to distributors, who would then sell to hair salons, was extremely profitable. Other competitors who were selling to big box stores would have to spend tons of money on advertising, but JP didn't need to spend tons of money on advertising because they would sell to the hairdressers who would then act like salespeople to sell the products. By the mid-80s, they were international, selling into markets as far as China. 6 years after launching, the company was ranked in the top 100 companies of Inc. magazine, and their sales were in the hundreds of millions per year. This is at a time when they only had 27 employees on the official corporate payroll. JP and Mitchell were raking it in. Their compensation, 6 years into launching the business, was over $10 million each. JP said that in the first 30 years of being in business, they've had less than 30 people leave the company, which sounds incredible. And here's some of the stuff they do to keep people happy. They buy lunch to all employees every day. They contribute to a lot of charities as a company, and they've never done any testing on animals. When they first started the company, all their competitors did animal testing, but JP committed to not doing any of that since the very start of the firm. Now, by the late 80s, the hair business had done so well that JP was worth over $100 million. He was chatting with a friend that had an upcoming trip to Mexico. JP asked him to bring back some of the best tequila that he could find. At the time, tequila in the United States was mostly rough tasting. They didn't really have a high quality sipping tequila. The friend brought back some Patron, and JP loved it. It was the smoothest tequila he ever tasted. JP then ordered a whole bunch of cases and put them into these beautiful custom hand-blown bottles. His team designed the labels to make the brand pop. And he figured that if they couldn't make it into a business, he'd just give the bottles away to friends and family. He had several thousand bottles, so that would make for a lot of Christmas gifts. When deciding on the price for the tequila, they sold it for around $89. This was 30 years ago, and that price made it the most expensive tequila on the market. It was more than double the price of the second most expensive tequila. Distributors and other people working in the industry thought that JP was crazy. Anyone who tried Patron agreed that it was one of the best tequilas they ever tasted. But no one thought that it would sell at that price. It just seemed way out there. But JP and his partner went door to door to restaurants and pitched their tequila. And slowly more and more people started discovering it. What really helped was that JP had several celebrity friends like Clint Eastwood and Dan Aykroyd, and Clint Eastwood surprised JP by featuring Patron in one of his movies. And next thing you know, Patron was getting featured in media all over the place. Artists were singing about it in songs and they were putting it in music videos. JP was shocked at all this free PR. He asked them why they did it, and they said it was because they loved the product. It was all free promotion that was happening just because of how good the product was. JP basically invented high-end tequila. Today, Patron sells for around $70 a bottle, which is pricey, but it's not an outrageous amount. Alright, so JP scaled 2 separate businesses to massive success. Today, he's worth almost $3 billion. But through all this, he hasn't forgotten about the importance of giving, so each year he contributes to over 100 charities worldwide. And he's also signed up for the Giving Pledge, so he's committed to giving away over half of his net worth to charity. A true business great with a big heart. Alright, Vision Nation, that wraps it up for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, you can check out episode 44. It's a cool story of how Sarah Blakely turned 5,000 into over $1 billion. Also, if you're a new listener, please hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and if you know someone who's interested in learning about people making millions, please share this episode with them. Thank you, and I hope you have an amazing day. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon as the basis for investment decisions. Before making any decisions, consult a professional. I may maintain positions in the securities discussed on this podcast. This show is copyrighted by Wall Street Vision. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.